Hi, welcome my channel. Today's story will leave you speechless. A young man gets pushed out of a vacation he paid for, by his own parents, to make room for his lazy brother. But the ending? No one saw it coming. Stay tuned. Liam Carter had been planning the surprise for nearly a year. Between managing high-stakes projects and hopping across time zones for meetings, he'd carved out every spare dollar, every bonus check, every mile point, all for this, an unforgettable, all-expenses-paid trip to Paris for his parents. Deborah and Richard Carter had spent decades dreaming about it, swooning over travel shows, circling brochures, and talking about romantic cobblestone streets and candlelit cafes as if they were fairy tales just out of reach. They never had the money or time. And Liam, ever the dutiful son, wanted to be the one to make that dream real. He'd spared no detail: 5-star accommodations near the Seine, a full itinerary with a private guide, even a surprise first-class return flight to end the week in pure comfort. This wasn't just about checking a box, it was about giving back. For all the emotional distance and subtle favoritism over the years, Liam had convinced himself that maybe, just maybe, this grand gesture would bridge the gap. He'd booked a seat for himself too, imagining shared laughter in French markets and proud smiles over fancy dinners. It was the kind of family bonding he'd always longed for but never quite had. This was his moment to rewrite the narrative, to show them he was more than just the responsible one, the provider, the safe bet, while his younger brother Ethan coasted through life. And as he pulled into his parents' quiet Toronto suburb that morning, spotting their excited faces and neatly packed luggage, a warmth spread in his chest. Deborah was practically glowing. Richard stood tall like he couldn't wait to tell the neighbors. And Liam felt that rare flicker of belonging. He turned off the engine, stepped out with a grin, ready to surprise them with the final touches of their dream getaway. For the first time in years, everything felt right, until it didn't. Liam stepped out of the car, heart light and buzzing with anticipation, the cool Toronto morning brushing against his cheeks. He expected hugs, maybe even tears, the kind of reaction you only see in holiday commercials. Instead, what greeted him was off. Deborah was already outside, her signature beige trench coat neatly buttoned, clutching a designer handbag Liam was certain she hadn't bought herself. She waved excitedly, practically bouncing on her heels. Richard stood beside her, arms crossed but smiling in that quiet, satisfied way that meant he was proud of the gift, of the image it projected. But standing between them was someone who absolutely didn't belong in this moment: Ethan. His younger brother wore a rumpled hoodie, sweatpants, and a duffel bag slung over one shoulder like he was headed to a sleepover. Not an international trip. Liam's eyes narrowed as he stepped closer, scanning Ethan with confusion. What's he doing here?" he asked, already knowing he wouldn't like the answer. Deborah lit up with that sugary voice she used whenever she knew she was about to deliver something controversial but wanted it to sound delightful. "Oh, sweetheart, we forgot to tell you, Ethan will be going in your place." She gave Ethan a quick, affectionate pat on the shoulder, as if this whole absurd idea was perfectly normal. Liam blinked, stunned. "Excuse me?" he said, his voice low. Ethan shrugged with a smug grin, like it was a joke he was in on. "Yeah, man. Mom and Dad thought I could really use the break. You know how stressed I've been lately." Liam's jaw clenched. Stressed? This was Ethan, the same Ethan who hadn't held a job in over 2 years. Who spent entire days playing video games in the basement, living off their parents' sympathy and Liam's occasional reluctant handouts. Deborah chimed in quickly, mistaking Liam's silence for confusion rather than simmering rage. "We just thought, with all the traveling you already do for work, maybe this would be a better opportunity for your brother. He needs something uplifting in his life. And you've always been so generous." Generous. That word stabbed deeper than she realized. Liam looked at his father, hoping, praying, for some sign of disagreement. But Richard merely shrugged. "It's all settled. We should get going. Don't want to miss the flight." That was it. No discussion. No thank you. No say in the matter. Just a quiet replacement of his presence with Ethan's. Like he was a disposable cog in some well-oiled machine of entitlement. Liam inhaled deeply, his hands tightening around his keys. Every fiber of him wanted to scream. to unload years of resentment and frustration. But he didn't. He swallowed it like he always did, felt it burn going down, and gave a hollow nod. "All right," he said quietly, "let's go." As they loaded the bags into the trunk, Ethan was already gabbing about all the Paris anime shops he wanted to hit up. Deborah giggled, saying how wonderful it would be for Ethan to finally experience culture. Liam kept his eyes on the road as they drove toward Pearson International Airport, each mile pounding in his chest. They had no idea what was coming, but they would, very soon. The drive to Pearson International was suffocating. Liam sat in the driver's seat, jaw clenched, eyes locked on the road, while Ethan chatted away in the back like a child on his first school trip. "Dude, do you think the hotel has one of those bidets? I heard they do in Europe. That's gonna be wild." Deborah laughed like it was the funniest thing she'd ever heard. "You're going to love it, Ethan. This trip will be so good for you." Richard chimed in with an approving grunt, eyes occasionally flicking to his phone, already checking traffic times to the terminal. No one noticed Liam's silence. No one thought to ask how he felt. They were too caught up in their fantasy, a fantasy built entirely on his sacrifice. It wasn't just about the money. Liam had poured hours into planning this trip. He had personally researched the perfect walking tour, made calls in French to arrange the hotel concierge service, and had even booked a secret return surprise, first-class flights home with access to the exclusive lounges. That was supposed to be the final cherry on top. A moment where, at the end of it all, they'd look at him and say, "You did this for us. Thank you." But instead, they had thanked him by replacing him. The car rolled to a stop at the terminal curb. Deborah leaned over and gave him a quick kiss on the cheek. "We'll send you pictures, sweetheart. Love you." Ethan shoved his door open and grabbed his duffel with a lopsided grin. "Thanks, bro. Seriously, this is sick. Appreciate it." Richard gave him a firm pat on the shoulder. "You're a good son, Liam." Liam smiled. For the first time that morning, he truly smiled. "Yeah," he said softly. "I know." He watched them walk toward the entrance, their luggage rolling behind them, their laughter trailing in the wind. Once they were out of sight, he pulled out his phone, opened the airline's mobile app, and navigated to the reservation section. His thumb hovered for a moment over the red cancel booking button. He took a breath, then tapped. The screen blinked. A confirmation popped up. "Your booking has been successfully cancelled." Just like that, their dream trip vanished into the digital ether. He drove off slowly, merging back into traffic with a sense of calm that almost felt alien. It didn't take long, his phone buzzed before he even made it to the airport parking lot exit. "Deborah, sweetie, there's an issue with the tickets. The airline says they're cancelled?" Liam smirked. "Oh really? That's strange." He texted back. Seconds later, her call came in. He let it ring, then silenced it. Another buzz. "Richard, fix this now. Something's wrong. They say we don't have seats." "Yeah," Liam thought. "You don't." He took the ramp onto the highway, watching the city skyline stretch ahead. The next message came from Ethan. "Ethan, bro, what's going on? They're saying we're not even in the system. Did you mess something up?" Liam finally replied, "Nope, just cancelled everything. Hopefully, your adventure is still enjoyable." The fallout was immediate. Notifications exploded, missed calls, furious texts, emotional voicemails. He ignored them all. At home, he tossed his keys onto the counter, grabbed a cold drink, and flopped onto the couch, sinking into the cushions with a long exhale. He didn't feel bad, not even a little. Let them panic. Let them scramble. Let Deborah cry at the check-in desk while trying to charm the airline rep. Let Richard stew with anger as he realized his own credit card limit couldn't handle new last-minute international tickets. Let Ethan finally understand that not every prize in life was going to be handed to him. And the best part? They didn't know yet that there were no return flights either. Liam had booked their trip as one way on purpose. He had always intended to reveal the first-class surprise later. But since they had made it so clear that he was no longer needed on this family vacation, the return trip had been quietly erased from their future. Let them figure that out on their own. As his phone lit up again with a dozen more alerts, Liam took another sip of his drink and smiled. Liam didn't need to be at the airport to know exactly what was happening. He could picture the entire unraveling scene with vivid clarity, the stunned expression on Deborah's face as the airline agent politely explained over and over that no reservation existed under their names. The way her voice would rise, sweet at first, then sharp, blaming the system, demanding escalation. She would flutter her hands, insist there was a mistake, try to charm her way out. Richard, meanwhile, would stand behind her, arms crossed, seething quietly. He never liked scenes, but he hated being powerless even more. And Ethan, Liam could just see him standing off to the side, looking confused, maybe fiddling with his phone, waiting for someone, anyone, to solve the problem for him. That was the pattern. That had always been the pattern. Liam handled things. Liam fixed things. Not anymore. He'd turned off his ringer an hour ago, but the vibration from the constant messages still echoed on his coffee table. At first, they were just alerts. Then the calls started. Then the voicemails, one after another. All the same, disbelief, rage, desperation. Deborah's voice cracked as she begged him to explain. Richard's was colder, accusing, demanding, full of the same authority he used when reprimanding employees at work. And Ethan's messages? Predictable. Dude, just buy new tickets. You've got the money. That one almost made Liam laugh. As if this chaos was somehow his responsibility to fix. As if he hadn't already done enough. He waited until the messages piled up, then finally responded to all of them with a single text. I could afford it. I just won't. And then, one by one, he blocked their numbers. Deborah first. Her last message a guilt-laced rant about how he'd destroyed everything and humiliated his family. Richard next, after demanding he repair the damage immediately. Finally, Ethan, who had the nerve to write, I'm your brother, man. Liam replied once, then act like it, before blocking him too. Silence followed. Beautiful, uninterrupted silence. For the first time in years, no one expected him to clean up a mess he didn't make. No one was calling him a disappointment for refusing to bend. No one was guilt-tripping him into sacrificing more of himself for people who never even said thank you. He stretched out on the couch, his phone now blissfully quiet, and imagined the three of them still stuck at the gate, still trying to piece together what had happened, still waiting for their fixer to swoop in and save the day. But he wasn't coming, not this time. By the time evening settled over the city, Liam had already replayed the day's events in his mind a dozen times. But as the adrenaline faded, something even stronger took its place, clarity. This wasn't just about what happened at the airport. This was about years. Years of being dependable, invisible, useful. Years of footing bills, fixing problems, and being rewarded with silence or expectation. And now, as he sat in the dim light of his apartment with a quiet that felt earned, he knew there was one final step to take. His parents had always cared more about appearances than reality. They curated their lives for likes, for praise, for admiration, vacation albums, anniversary dinners, carefully captioned humble brags. It was time to show people the real story behind the filter. Liam opened Facebook and placed his fingers on the keyboard. No rants, no essays, just precision. Wishing my parents Deborah and Richard, and my brother Ethan, a fantastic adventure in Paris. I was supposed to join them, but at the airport, they decided Ethan should take my place. Hope they enjoy the non-refundable one-way tickets I paid for. He hit post without a second thought. The reaction was immediate. Within minutes, likes and shocked emojis poured in. Comments followed, fast and furious. His cousin Natalie. Wait, they replaced you? At the airport? Brandon, a childhood friend. Bro, are you serious? That's insane. A former neighbor. I always thought your mom was a little extra. But wow. Then came the screenshots. A friend messaged him a capture of Deborah's now deleted post from earlier that morning. A selfie at the terminal with the caption, off to Paris. A well-earned family getaway, feeling blessed. But now the comments were ruthless. Lisa had commented, you mean the trip your son paid for? Uncle Mike wrote, didn't he get replaced last minute? That's not blessed, that's heartless. Deborah must have seen the damage. The post vanished. Liam laughed so hard he nearly spilled his drink. All it had taken was a few lines of truth to shatter the illusion they'd spent years building. No more family of the year facade. No more Instagram sainthood. The mask had slipped, and the world was seeing them for what they really were. Not because he wanted sympathy, because he wanted honesty. Accountability. And for once, the story was being told on his terms. The knock came just after 10 p.m. Liam had just finished dinner and was halfway through a rewatch of some mindless crime series when the sound jolted him upright. 3 sharp raps. Heavy and familiar. He paused, remote in hand, heart oddly steady. He didn't need to check, he knew who it was. Still, he walked to the door, peered through the peephole, and confirmed the inevitable. Richard Carter stood stiffly outside. Jaw set, shoulders squared, wearing that tightly wound look he always wore when things slipped beyond his control. His coat was still zipped, his hands buried in the pockets. Not from the cold but to restrain them. That was the look Liam had grown up with, barely managed fury disguised as quiet authority. Liam opened the door without a word. Richard didn't wait for an invitation. He stepped inside like he still owned the place, like he had any right to be there. Liam quietly shut the door behind him, crossing his arms as his father turned to face him. "We need to talk," Richard said flatly. Liam tilted his head. "Do we? You need to fix this." The words came fast, like a command, as if Liam had simply missed a chore. And now order had to be restored. Liam let out a soft laugh. Not amused, but genuinely baffled. "Fix what, exactly? The vacation I paid for? Or the part where you all decided I was disposable?" Richard's jaw tightened. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a few slow steps around the living room, eyes roaming like he was collecting his thoughts, or calming his temper. "You embarrassed your mother," he finally said, low and clipped. Liam raised an eyebrow. "Did I? Or did she do that to herself at the airport when she announced Ethan was more deserving of a trip I funded?" "You're blowing this out of proportion," Richard snapped. "No," Liam said, voice firmer. "You are. You made a decision behind my back. Used my money to do it. And expected me to stay quiet. Typical." Richard exhaled hard through his nose. Switching tactics. His tone softened, taking on that worn, manipulative edge Liam knew too well. "Look, maybe we didn't handle it the right way. I'll admit that, but this Facebook stunt? Airing family business like that? It's beneath you." Liam leaned against the counter, folding his arms. "No, Dad, what's beneath me is being treated like an ATM. Like a second-class son. That post? That was truth. If it made you uncomfortable, maybe you should look at why. We're family," Richard said, voice heavy now. "We don't turn on each other like this." Liam stared at him for a moment. Quiet. Then, with measured calm, "You did. All of you did this morning. You turned on me the second you decided my presence wasn't necessary." A tense silence filled the room. "Our flight leaves in a few hours," Richard said eventually. "Colder now. This is your last chance to make it right." Liam pushed off the counter and walked to the front door. He opened it slowly, wide enough for his father to see that the conversation was over. "Then you'd better get moving," he said, voice cool. "Wouldn't want you to miss it again." Richard stood frozen, rage simmering just under the surface. But he didn't speak. After a beat, he turned and walked out without another word. Liam closed the door behind him and locked it with a sharp click. For the first time, he felt no guilt, no fear, only control. The silence that followed Richard's departure was unlike anything Liam had ever experienced. It wasn't empty or lonely, it was full. Full of space he hadn't realized he needed. Space to think, to feel, to simply exist without being pressed into service. He sat back down on the couch. The same spot where, hours earlier, he'd watched their world unravel. Now, though, the chaos had gone quiet. His phone was still buzzing intermittently on the coffee table. But the sounds were dull now. Distant. Guilt never came. Instead, there was clarity, a clean, sharp line between what he had tolerated for years and what he would no longer accept. He picked up the phone. Not to respond, but to scroll through the storm he'd left in his wake. Dozens of texts, missed calls, blocked voicemails. None of it moved him. But what did stop him cold was a simple message from his cousin. "Samantha Tran, you really deserve so much better. I'm going to be in town next week. Want to meet for drinks? I'm sorry they treated you like that." Liam reread it 3 times. It wasn't just the offer, it was the acknowledgement. For so long, he'd felt like his pain lived in isolation, invisible even as he bled. But Sam's words cracked something open. Someone had seen, someone had understood. He sat with that thought for a while, staring at the city lights blinking faintly through the apartment window. All those years of biting his tongue, of stepping aside, of letting Ethan take and take because it was easier than challenging the roles they'd all silently agreed upon, it all ended here. He didn't feel righteous. He didn't feel vindictive. He felt free. For once, there were no demands to meet, no emotional debt to pay, just stillness. And for Liam, that was everything. The days that followed were quiet, and Liam embraced every second of it. He met up with Samantha at a cozy downtown bar, tucked away from the chaos of the city. They talked for hours about work, life, and everything that had built up over the years. Sam listened without interruption, without judgment, just quiet understanding. She'd seen it, she admitted, the favoritism, the imbalance. She'd always felt like Liam carried a weight no one ever acknowledged. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel crazy for feeling used. He felt validated. When they hugged goodbye, she simply said, "You did what you had to do, and I'm proud of you." Liam carried those words with him all the way home like armor. A few days later, his phone rang again. He stared at the screen, watching the caller ID flash. Mom. He hesitated. Part of him wanted to ignore it, maybe forever. But curiosity, and some lingering thread of humanity, made him answer. Her voice was smaller than usual, almost broken. "Your father and I, we've been talking about everything, and we realize now that we messed up." Liam said nothing, letting the words hang. Deborah continued, "We treated you unfairly. It wasn't right. I don't expect you to forgive us, but we'd like to make amends." Her tone was softer, more uncertain than he'd ever heard. There was no spin, no sugarcoating, just regret. For a long moment, Liam didn't know what to say. Not because he didn't have words, but because the old version of himself, the one trained to soothe, to fix, to make peace, was already forming a response. And he shut it down. He breathed in deeply and answered with quiet finality. "I'm glad you're finally acknowledging it. But I'm not coming back. I've been okay on my own. And I'm not going to let you drag me back into chaos." There was a pause on the other end. A stunned silence. Deborah let out a soft exhale, like she'd expected forgiveness would come as easily as the swipe of a credit card. But it didn't. Not this time. "I don't hate you," Liam added, "but I'm done being the one who's always expected to carry everything. I deserve better." His voice didn't tremble. It was calm, steady, firm. "Goodbye, Mom." And just like that, he ended the call. He didn't cry. He didn't rage. He simply stood there in the stillness, knowing something permanent had shifted. The final thread had been cut, not in anger, but in clarity. It wasn't about punishment or revenge. It was about release. He no longer needed their approval, their affection, or their presence. What he needed, what he finally gave himself, was peace. The next morning, the air felt different, lighter. Liam stood by the window of his apartment, watching the early sunlight cut across the skyline. Toronto buzzed below, cars humming, people rushing, life moving on, and for the first time in a long while, he felt like he could move with it. Not as someone trying to hold a fractured family together. Not as a silent provider. But as himself. There was no phone buzzing. No guilt riding his shoulders. No mental to-do list of how to fix someone else's mess. Just quiet, unburdened space. He realized then that he didn't need closure from his parents. He'd already created it for himself. Their lack of acknowledgement used to tear him apart. Now, it simply didn't matter. He picked up his laptop, opened a travel site, and without hesitation, searched for solo trips. Prague, Kyoto, Amsterdam, anywhere he could go, not to prove a point, not to impress anyone, but because he wanted to. He had spent years treating himself like an afterthought. That was over now. As he scrolled through options, he found himself smiling, not the tight, polite smile he'd worn for years, but something looser, freer. This time, it wouldn't be about luxury or planning the perfect itinerary for others. It would be messy, impulsive, his. Later that afternoon, he met up with Samantha again. They laughed over coffee, made vague plans to travel together sometime. she said. You look lighter, and he believed her. The world hadn't changed, but his place in it had. He was no longer orbiting around a family that only valued him for what he gave. He was finally standing still, on his own ground, as the evening sky turned gold and the streets filled with the weekend rhythm. Liam stepped out into the city with no destination in mind. And that, for the first time, was the point. No role to play, no expectation to fill, just a man choosing himself after a lifetime of being chosen last. The story that had always centered around their approval was over. A new one had just begun. And this time, he was the only author. The story teaches a powerful lesson about self-worth and boundaries. No matter how much you give, people who see you only as a resource will never truly value you. Liam's journey shows that love without respect is manipulation. And sometimes, choosing yourself means walking away, even from family. True peace comes not from fixing others, but from freeing yourself from roles you never agreed to play. Standing up for yourself may come with silence, anger, or blame, but it also opens the door to healing, clarity, and a life defined on your own terms. Respect isn't given, it must be earned.